Hi guys, it's Stuart from Mr. Dealer's Primary History here, and this Thursday, April 23rd, is St. George's Day. So, this is a quick video lesson to answer a couple of key questions about it. Number 1, where does the story of St. George and the Dragon come from? We'll read the story together, and there are a couple of tasks to have a go at as we go through. And then, what can we use from the story in our own modern lives? So, let's have a look. Lesson outline. We're going to start with the background to the story of St. George and the Dragon. Then we're going to read the story, including 3 optional tasks. How can we use the story in our modern lives to relate it to us? And then, what do we need to question about the story and how St. George is being presented? Let's start with the background to the story. So this is a story of a knight, a princess, and a dragon. It's the famous tale of St. George and the Dragon. It's set in the Roman period, but the story came popular almost 900 or so years later during the medieval period. He is often shown as a knight in shining armour, but this is not going to be accurate given he was alive in the Roman period. The story was popular in the Middle East, and it was picked up by the Crusaders when they went out to that part of the world. Ever since, St. George has been associated with knights and chivalry. Now, chivalry is the code of honour and rules knights in armour used to follow. They had to promise to be brave, fair, honest, and promised to protect the weak and the poor. He is the patron saint of England, but he is shared with many other countries and cities around the world. In England, St. George's Day is April 23rd. He is also celebrated in Eastern Europe, usually on May the 6th. The story that I'm going to read to you has been changed slightly because traditionally, at the end, he converts the townspeople to Christianity before he kills the dragon. There are many other versions out there as well, with their own individual take on it. Where is the story set? If you have a look at the map to the right hand side of the screen, you can see a blue box. Inside that blue box is the Roman province of Cappadocia. That's where it is originally set. It was later transferred to Libya, which is green, in a version called the Golden Legend. And at the top, inside the red box, is the United Kingdom. That's where we live. So you can see where in the world we live compared to where the story was originally set. So, let's read the story. I'll read part of the story to you and then say pause. The text will appear on the screen so you can follow along as well if you want. A task will appear on the screen related to what you've just read. It can be done as a talking task, a written task, or maybe a different way. The choice is entirely up to you. Once you've done the task, restart the story and listen and follow along with the next bit. You don't have to do them, but it will help you think more about what we are reading and about what we can learn from this story related to history as well. Part 1. Here comes the dragon. Before we start reading, let's have a quick look at our timeline. You can see on the right hand side there is an arrow. It says we are here. That represents the year 2020, which we live in at the moment. If we go back in time, following the timeline along, you can see a second arrow. It says the story is set here. That's around 300 AD during the Roman period of history, which some of us will have learned about. Let's get started with our reading then. 1,700 years ago, in the time of the Roman Empire, there was, just outside the city of Cyrene in North Africa, a large, stagnant and foul-smelling lake. In this lake, there lived a dragon. It killed anyone and anything that it breathed on. It began with the sheep. But when they were gone, it began to look at the people. The people of Cyrene had no choice but to come to an agreement with the dragon. They agreed to give it one person every month, so long as he left the others alone and unharmed for the rest of the time. But how were they going to decide which person to sacrifice? Pause. So this is the time for our first task. Let's have a look what we need to do. Task 1. Imagine that you are the king of Cyrene. You have to come up with an idea about how to choose who will be sacrificed to the dragon. A couple of rules. It must be fair to everyone, and everyone has to agree to it. So once you've come up with your idea, it's probably a good idea to think about how you'd explain to people why it's the best method. And there are no good choices here, but it will be the best of a bad bunch. So pause the video here, have a go at the task. I've included a PDF version for you to write on if you wish, but remember you can complete it in any way that you like. So once you've done that task, restart the video. I wonder if you've come up with a similar idea to what the people of Cyrene actually came up with. Let's carry on reading. Let's have a look. Part 2. The solution? The king decided that the names of every citizen should be scratched into pieces of pottery and kept in a great urn, which is a large pot. Each month, one of the names would be drawn out of the urn, and that person would be given to the dragon. In this way, men and women, both rich and poor, were chosen to be fed to the evil beast. Then one day, the name of the princess was shaken out of the urn. According to the king's own law, his daughter must be sacrificed. He called the people together and offered them gold and treasure if only they would agree to spare her from the dragon. The judges, who oversaw the lottery, said it must be completely fair, or else the people would no longer accept it. Much saddened, the king said to the princess, "My dear, I will never see your wedding day." A week went past, and the day arrived when she had to meet her fate. The palace servants dressed her in her wedding gown and placed a crown of flowers on her head. They led her out of the city in a procession and headed for the lake where the dragon lived. As they were on their way, a Roman soldier came riding up to the city. His name was George, and he was a Christian from Cappadocia in Turkey. George stopped and asked why such a beautiful young woman was looking so sad on her wedding day. A citizen replied, "Because according to the law, she must this day marry the dragon who lives in that lake, and her wedding gift shall be death." George immediately replied, "If that really be the case, then let me slay the dragon." The citizens warned him that nobody stood a chance against such a ferocious, plague-breathing lizard. But George was determined to save the princess. Pause. So here's our second task. Let's have a look what it is. Task 2. All knights were chivalrous. And remember, chivalry is the code of honour and rules that knights in the Middle Ages used to follow. They had to promise to be brave, fair, honest, and promise to protect the weak and the poor. So what I'd like you to do is answer these questions. What would a knight do today to be chivalrous? Because I don't know about you, but I haven't seen many dragons around lately. And then once you've come up with those ideas, I want you to think about a knight in the Middle Ages. How would the actions of the knight today be the same and different? Like before, there's a worksheet you can have a go at, or you can record it in a different way, or if you would rather talk about it with someone, that's also fine. Pause the video here and have a go. Now that you've had a go at that task and hopefully finished, let's have a look. There's another question I want us to have a think about. Would these qualities be the same for people throughout history? Now, a bit of a bonus challenge after you finish this lesson might be to have a think about the characters from history that you've learned about before. They are most probably going to come from mythology, which means we have to remember that they are stories, so elements may be true, but they'll either be added to make them more dramatic, or possibly made up just a bit. Have a think about the other parts of history that you've learned about and the stories that you've read. Can you find similarities and difference between the qualities that people saw in their heroes throughout? Do that afterwards. Let's carry on with the story. Part 3. The fight. The people tied her to a tree by the lake and left her to meet her fate. George saw the dragon emerge out of the swampy waters, and he charged up on his horse and flung his spear into its shoulder. The dragon let out a piercing shriek. It was wounded, but not enough to kill it. While it was writhing in pain, George managed to cut the princess free from her bonds. That's what she was tied up with. The dragon was enraged and turned to face its attacker. George retreated and called out to the princess to take off the belt from around her waist and to throw it at the dragon. This she did, and by a miracle, the belt wrapped itself round the dragon's neck like a collar. Immediately, the dragon became as peaceful as a lamb, and the princess was able to lead it by her belt back to the city. When the people saw the princess and George leading the dragon back to their walls, they became angry and afraid, until St. George drew out his sword and slew the dragon. Then the people knew that from then on they could live safe and unharmed. So George slayed the dragon and the princess was saved. Task 3. Now that we've finished the story, let's think about what it tells us about history and how we have to be careful with what we learn about. Because there are elements of this story that are not true. They have changed through history because people have changed them. I want you to have a go at writing down up to 3 things that you think have been added to make the story better, more interesting, and probably didn't happen that way. There are lots to choose from. Feel free to listen to the story again and have a look at what you've done. Pause the video there. Now that you've had a go at that, let's have a think about the things that probably didn't happen that way. Number 1, probably the most obvious. Was there a dragon? I doubt it very much, as there's no evidence that dragons actually existed. I wonder if people found dinosaur bones and thought they were dragons. Just a thought. Number 2, he was a Roman soldier. Would he have had a spear like that? Would he have had shining armour on? Possibly not. They did wear armour, but it's not knight in shining armour that we often think about. There are several others. So now that you've done those, let's have a look at what we can do next. It's time for some bonus history. The image on your screen is from 1501, so that's about 500 years ago. A long time after the story was written and after it had become popular. It is of St. George. Pause the video here and think about which parts are not accurate, considering we know it wasn't a story from the medieval period. Pause the video here and have a look. Now that you've come up with some ideas, let's have a look at what we can learn from the source and the things that probably aren't very accurate. Number 1, look at the way he's dressed. He's dressed in armour like the knights from that period of history would wear. Not a Roman, but it shows what people of the time would look like. Can you see the king? Look on the left-hand side of the image. Just behind the back of the horse's tail and just above it, you can see the king. He looks like he's hiding. I wonder if that's there to try and convince us that St. George is braver than the king. And then look at the very bottom of the image. There are bones. What does that tell us about the dragon? Definitely tells us that he's been eating people, I would say. Now, let's think about what we can learn from this for sources in history. Number 1, not everything recorded in history is the truth. Quite often, the person writes down what they think is the truth, but as we know, there is always more than one side to things. Number 2, if it doesn't tell us the facts, it can help us infer what they believed was important for a person to be. So the bravery was very important. George being brave, being honourable, doing the right thing. It can tell us about their culture and beliefs, what they believed in, what they thought was important for their society. And there is usually some element of truth in there as well. Final task, just as I leave you. If St. George were real and alive today, what would he be like? I wonder what he'd do for a job. I wonder what acts of bravery he'd do for people. So have a go at coming up with the answers to those questions. And just a final thought to leave you on. Although the story of St. George and the Dragon probably is very over-exaggerated, what parts of the story can we take for our lives and think about how we should behave and how we should live? Have a think about those and see what you can change to make you a chivalrous person. I hope you found the lesson useful. It'd be really great if you could subscribe to the YouTube channel and maybe send me a message to say how you've got on with the lesson. I'd love to hear from you.